Hello, and welcome to the Crowley ISD PLC Curriculum Preview for English 1, Unit 2A. I'm Sharon Graves, Secondary ELAR Curriculum Coordinator, and it's good to be back with you again. I'm enjoying working with you this school year, and my goal each 6 weeks is to provide you with a high-yield instructional strategy that you can easily implement in your classroom. Please continue to communicate with me anytime for questions or additional support. Please pause for a moment to review the Unit 2A Local Assessment Blueprint. 17 instructional days will be utilized for Unit 2A, beginning October 1st through October 24th. The local assessment will be available for printing on October 23rd and should be assessed on October 27th. Remember to administer unit assessments within 3 school days upon completion of the unit, and the blueprint is also located on the CTL website. For today's purposes, I will identify curriculum hotspots and provide comprehension instructional strategies, including the SIFT strategy, anchor questions, and Fundamental 5 strategies. I will lead you through an analysis of the cognitive, content, and context of the readiness standards. I will provide seed questions for your PLC to focus on learning. Complete the content builder in the PLC for Reading PLC for Knowledge and Skill Statement 1.3, Supporting Standard 1.3a. And then you will analyze the standards in the IFD to gain a deeper understanding of how to use them to focus on student learning. Unit 2A is Analyzing Poetic Structure, and it's taught during the second 6 weeks. Materials you will need today are your Unit 2 IFD, Organizing Instruction using the TEAC Standard Types document, and the PLC for Reading PLC. For the second 6 weeks, the curriculum preview will target Supporting Standard 1.3a, Analyze the Effects of Diction and Imagery in Poetry, and the Knowledge and Skill Statement 1.3, Understand, Make Inferences, and Draw Conclusions about Structure and Elements of Poetry from Unit 2a. Based on the heat map displayed, please pause and discuss what conclusions can be drawn about 1.3a and 1.3. Let's look at the question from the 2013 English 1 STAR that assesses Standard 1.3 in Figure 19b. 3 questions from 1.3 were asked on the EOC in 2013. Although no questions were asked for English 1 in 2014, 3 questions were asked on the English 2 EOC in 2014. What level of specificity is this question? Please pause the video to discuss this and its alignment to the standard. Now that we've identified our hotspots for Unit 2, let's focus on learning by first studying the TEACs and then discussing the 4 essential PLC questions. Please pause the video and locate 1.3 on page 17 and 1.3a on page 18 of your IFD. Let's recall our questions that drive every PLC. What do we want our students to learn? How do we know when they've learned it? How do we respond when students don't learn? And how do we enrich those students who do learn? To set a purpose for reading, we study our standards. We read with this first question in mind. At this time, please pause the video to locate Unit 2 in your IFD if you've not already done so. Let's review the levels of specificity. There are 3 components to each TEAC and SE: the cognitive, content, and context. For TEAC 1.3, students are asked to understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions. Notice the cognitive level of Bloom's, in which they're asked to think. Structure and elements of poetry is the content, and poetry is the context. Figure 19b, making complex inferences, may also be assessed as a readiness or supporting standard with 1.3. The second hotspot, SE 1.3a, is part of Category 2, Understanding Analysis of Literary Text, and it makes up 11 questions of the STAR Blueprint Assessment. Please pause for a moment to look on page 17 of your Unit 2 IFD and review the standard and unit level of specificity. What is the verb and the cognitive level of Bloom's? What's the content, the what students are learning? What's the context, the how in which students are practicing and showing their learning? Did you notice the Bloom's level of the verb analyze? The content is the effects of diction and imagery, and poetry is our context. Also notice the deep levels of specificity in this standard. What do we want our students to learn? And how are you already making it relevant and rigorous for them? Please pause for a moment and discuss this with your team. Question 2, how do we know when our students have learned? These should be our ongoing checks for understanding, continual formative assessments. How do you know that students understand and are demonstrating their learning to the depth and complexity of the standard? As we use the content builder, let's build our plan for learning with this question in mind. Let's review this diagram that helps us when we plan for instruction. It's vital that concepts be taught in connection with the process standards. Students use processes to acquire and demonstrate their learning. In English 1 and 2, standard figure 19b is the tools to know process, and 19a is the ways to show process. Still looking at Unit 2 on page 17 and 18 in the IFD and TEK 1.3 and 1.3a, place each SE in the corresponding color-coded graphic organizer. Remember to add figures 19a and b. Notice there is only one poetry supporting standard, but the knowledge and skill statement 1.3 is tested with figure 19b. Revisiting question 2. During and after building a plan using what we know about the process standards, we need to ask ourselves this question again: how do we know students are learning? And how do we respond when they don't learn? Remember that the supporting standards are the scaffolds of learning, the prerequisite skills that students need to begin learning. If they don't know the large concepts or you know they have gaps, this is a good place to start your intervention. Please pause and discuss how are you already responding when your students experience difficulty. Question 4, how are we enriching those students who are learning? Are we differentiating the content and the process? Do we vary the text to match their reading level? Do we differentiate the how they're learning according to their readiness level? Do we differentiate the why by providing deeper levels of reading or setting an in-depth purpose for those students that already can make those intricate inferences? As a collective team, are you aligning your understanding of the verb, the skill, and the context? Does your team already agree on what students must be able to do to show their mastery? Are you understanding the prerequisite skills to know where your instruction should begin? Do your teachers check for understanding through individual formative assessments, frequent formative assessments? Are you as a team collecting data and reviewing it to make your instructional decisions? And do you use the data to adjust your instructional plans? Let's begin planning. As a review, we will use the PLC for reading PLC. For 1.3 and figure 19b, our genre is poetry. The text we will use is a lyrical, seemingly humorous poem, but a narrative is later added. The levels of thinking is to establish a purpose, using background knowledge, creating sensory experiences, making inferences, and asking various levels of questions. Our evidence of learning is a graphic organizer and writing, and the strategies are close reading and the SIFT strategy. Well, what is SIFT? It's a strategy used with fiction and poetry to help readers explore literary elements and techniques that convey meaning and/or the theme. SIFT stands for symbolism, imagery, figurative language, tone, and theme. We want students to annotate, but most times they don't know what's important or what they're looking for. So SIFT gives them focus for annotating. We also want students to annotate on their reading passages, but when that's not possible, this handout is an example students can use to record their SIFT analyses. Bookmarks are also fun and can be used to help students prompt their thinking. Although students may begin sifting at the lower levels of Bloom's, analyzing the components, drawing inferences, and making connections about their purpose in the literary work meets the specificity of the standard and takes their thinking to a much deeper level. Mr. Payne, Crowley High School English teacher, used the SIFT strategy in his classroom. He began with the familiar passage, Humpty Dumpty, and went through the gradual release process with his students. He explained SIFT and then modeled the strategy with them using Humpty Dumpty. Here's a brief example of his modeling the strategy through guided instruction and questioning.
Obviously, the king feels a lot towards this egg, otherwise he wouldn't have devoted so many of his resources to it, right? So what other symbolism, imagery, or figurative language can we look at? Here is the big part though. What if the fall is not just a fall? What if the fall falls under this? We've already talked about it a little bit. How would you symbolically fall?
Like your levels of rain.
So we could say fall from grace.
What if like the kingdom?
Like